Two girls, one obsession, the Shocking Stella Murder Case. A chilling tragedy at Stella boarding school. In the pre-dawn hours of May 26, 2018, the hallways of Stella boarding school's girls' dormitory carried a stillness that felt almost artificial. For most, it was just another Saturday poised to begin with the usual routines: early morning wake-up calls, quiet chatter among friends, and the anticipation of a weekend rugby match that many students looked forward to. But for one dorm supervisor named Christelle, what started as an ordinary round of checking on the students would spiral into a discovery far beyond any horror she had ever imagined. She would soon find herself staring at the lifeless body of 17-year-old Charell Hogg hanging near the staircase railing, her feet still clad in plain white socks, dangling inches above the polished floor. Within an hour, the body of Marna Engelbrecht, Charell's best friend, would be found in another area of the dorm, a backpack strap twisted around her neck. What first appeared to be a chilling double tragedy, perhaps a mutual decision by two desperate teens, would give way to an unfolding series of contradictions, concealed tensions, and undisclosed threats that many people had overlooked or dismissed. In a relatively insular community, the shock waves from these deaths were immediate. Everyone wanted to know, were these two best friends so overwhelmed by something that they chose to end their lives in the same night, or had a more sinister story played out in those deserted corridors? The answers to these questions began to surface as investigators, family members, school officials, and even a private detective peeled back the layers of the girls' lives. Instead of a tragic but straightforward suicide pact, they found a messier, more complicated narrative featuring a controlling ex-boyfriend, a spiral of threats, mounting fear, and the desperation of loved ones trying to protect these girls from harm. The complexities of small-town relationships, the hush-hush nature of personal matters within tight-knit farming families, and the cultural backdrop of the Northwest province all contributed to a puzzle that demanded extensive effort to piece together. It was a puzzle involving not just the psychology of a tormented or jealous individual, but also the community's overall readiness, or lack thereof, to intervene when it mattered most. Charell Hogg, often called Chell by her closest friends, had grown up in Delville, a small rural town in the northwest province of South Africa. The province itself was known for sprawling farmland, pockets of savanna, and a particular brand of conservatism that lingered from its Afrikaner roots. She was a typical teenager in many respects, bright-eyed, curious, and excited about the near future, but also grappling with the everyday challenges of fitting in, making friends, and dealing with the emotional ups and downs of adolescence. She lived on her family's cattle farm with her father Ronnie, her stepmother Anna, and Anna's son Eston, whom she loved like a brother. Life there was characterized by early mornings, the sound of livestock, the dusty orange glow of the late afternoon sun, and quiet evenings filled with the hum of crickets. Her father was a devoted farmer. Her mother, Sonia, worked at a tourism lodge in a resort area not too far away. Though Ronnie and Sonia had divorced when Charell was quite young, they continued to maintain a cordial relationship for her sake. Before enrolling at Stella boarding school, Charell would alternate between staying 3 weeks on her father's farm and 1 week with her mother, ensuring that she had time with both parents. But once she entered the boarding environment, her visits to her mother decreased substantially, partly because of academic demands, extracurricular involvement, and the distance between her rural campus and her mother's lodge. Even so, her transition to life at Stella boarding school started on a relatively positive note. There was a newfound sense of independence. No more waking at dawn to feed cattle or wash farm equipment, and no more juggling time between two households. Instead, she found herself surrounded by classmates of similar ages, living in communal dorm spaces, forming new friendships, and discovering new interests. One bright spot in her early days at Stella was reconnecting with Marna Engelbrecht, a childhood friend she had not seen regularly since moving away years prior. Marna's family had known the Hoggs for a long time, sharing the same rural Afrikaner background, attending the same church on Sunday mornings, and crossing paths at local community gatherings. In fact, Marna's mother, Rionette, had even played music at Charell's parents' wedding, a testament to just how intertwined these families were. When Charell and Marna realized they would be in the same environment again, it felt almost like fate. They had been close in kindergarten, then drifted apart, but at Stella, their camaraderie blossomed. They ended up sharing a dorm room, spending weekends discussing their mutual passions, like their love for animals and horseback riding, and giggling over typical teenage hopes and dreams. Marna, who was academically inclined, expressed a desire to become a veterinarian someday, inspired by the many hours she'd spent tending animals on her own family's farm. Meanwhile, Charell nurtured a growing interest in photography, convinced that someday she would capture the world's beauty through her lens. Some of her relatives teased that with her tall, slender frame and striking eyes, she might have a shot at modeling instead, but Charell's heart seemed set on photography. All signs pointed to a bright and promising future, or at least that was the perception from the outside. Their environment in the northwest province offered a unique tapestry of farmland, fields dotted with grazing cattle, and the persistent resilience of a community where families knew each other across generations. Nothing in that landscape or in the day-to-day activities of the girls hinted at the darkness that would soon descend upon them. In March 2017, though, the course of Charell's life changed when she crossed paths with an 18-year-old young man named Xander, a former Stella student who had recently graduated. Unlike many students who left the school's orbit upon graduation, Xander still maintained local ties, partly because his father owned a nearby farm, and partly because he liked to hang around the school's events and the athletic gatherings, particularly rugby matches. He was undeniably eye-catching, standing taller than most, with broad shoulders, a strong athletic build, and a head of thick dark hair framing striking green eyes. Coupled with an unwavering confidence, he possessed a magnetism that drew looks wherever he went. That magnetism, however, masked the complexities that simmered beneath his surface. He had grown up under what some described as a troubled family dynamic. His father, Monty, was a former police officer turned farm owner who believed in discipline, structure, and strict moral codes. His mother, Marcia, had endured several miscarriages before finally giving birth to Xander, making him a long-awaited child she idolized to an unhealthy degree. After Monty and Marcia divorced, Xander found himself navigating two vastly different parental styles, his mother's coddling protectiveness, where he was never wrong and always to be defended, and his father's structured but often distant approach. This tug-of-war between opposing parenting philosophies contributed to Xander's complex personality, marked by moments of outward charm interspersed with flashes of anger or moody confrontation. During his time at Stella, he had been known for his rugby talents, but had also stirred controversy through altercations with classmates, arguments with teachers, and a general aura of volatility. Still, he was capable of turning on a charismatic front, which he did quite successfully in front of the school's administration and certain community members. But once he graduated, he chose not to pursue higher education, instead returning to help his father with the farm, where he spent much of his time hunting or engaging in outdoor sports. On social media, Xander curated a profile that offered occasional glimpses into his life, usually featuring pictures of rifles, prized hunting trophies, and group shots from local fishing competitions. Yet behind these images, according to rumors whispered among his peers, lay a simmering aggression, an intensity that sometimes manifested in controlling or condescending behavior toward those in his inner circle. When Xander and Charell first spoke at a school event that welcomed alumni back to mentor current students, the immediate spark was undeniable. Charell, then in her senior year, was in a vulnerable yet hopeful stage of life, still learning to assert herself, still eager to experience the world, and still brimming with the romantic illusions of a teenager. She found Xander's confident stride and easy charm captivating, which was a sentiment echoed by some of her friends, at least at first. In the weeks that followed, Xander made an active effort to spend time with her. He attended casual school gatherings, offered her rides into town, and joined her for milkshakes after classes. He listened intently when she spoke about her photography dreams and her desire to possibly study art or media after graduation. He even expressed admiration for her closeness to her father's work, hinting that he appreciated the values of farm life. Whether he truly cherished these aspects or merely said what he knew she wanted to hear was unclear. What was evident is that Charell, taken in by his overt attention and flattered by his athletic masculinity, fell quickly and deeply in love. Marna initially watched her friend's blossoming relationship with a mix of curiosity and cautious optimism. She recognized that Xander had a bit of a reputation, yet she hoped that his interest in Charell might be genuine. She even teased Charell about being swept off her feet by a handsome older graduate. However, as the weeks turned into months, subtle shifts in Charell's behavior caused Marna to grow uneasy. Charell began missing their usual weekend catch-ups, would sometimes seem preoccupied during their shared lunches, and occasionally retreated from group outings or social events without giving any reason. When Marna gently pressed her friend for an explanation, Charell would shrug it off, attributing it to fatigue, homework, or stuff going on at home. Marna, sensing that Charell's happy-go-lucky spirit was dimming, tried to remain supportive, but grew increasingly worried. Something about Xander's influence felt pervasive and a little ominous, like a blanket of tension that fell over Charell's once open personality. The first noticeable evidence of Xander's controlling side emerged when he began insisting on knowing whom Charell was texting, where she was hanging out, and how she spent her free time. At first, she interpreted his intrusive questions as a sign of deep caring, a signal that he was passionately invested in her life. She would often rationalize that, as a protective boyfriend, Xander simply wanted reassurance that she wasn't surrounded by bad influences. However, these demands gradually escalated. He wanted her phone passwords, demanded screenshots of her social media interactions, and displayed a growing resentment whenever she mentioned spending time with Marna or any of her other close friends. On a few occasions, he arrived unannounced at the girls' dorm, waiting outside until Charell appeared, only to interrogate her about her evening plans. Confusion and internal conflict gnawed at Charell. She was flattered by the intense attention, but also uneasy. During their more tender moments, Xander could be sweet, bringing her small gifts or praising her photography. Their arguments, however, were intense. He would sometimes lash out with words that felt like whiplashes, belittling her friends, criticizing her attire, or making offhand remarks about her physical appearance to keep her self-conscious. One day, after a seemingly mild disagreement, Charell showed up to class with faint bruises on her forearms. She lied when a concerned teacher asked about them, claiming she had accidentally bumped into a fence while helping her father at home. In truth, the bruises had come from an altercation with Xander, who had gripped her too tightly during a spat. She didn't know what to do with that small act of aggression, whether to see it as a terrifying omen or a random slip in an otherwise loving relationship. Marna was the only person who pressed Charell for an honest explanation. In one emotionally charged conversation, Charell broke down and admitted that Xander's jealousy had become suffocating, and that he sometimes lost his temper in frightening ways. Although Charell tried to downplay the gravity of the situation, she insisted Xander was just under a lot of stress. Marna recognized a toxic pattern and urged Charell to reconsider the relationship. But Charell remained torn, not wanting to lose a romance she had invested in, nor wanting to betray her best friend's concern. She vacillated between the two crucial figures in her life. Matters came to a head during preparations for prom. Charell and her mother, Sonia, went shopping for a dress, something that should have been a memorable, joyous mother-daughter moment. Instead, Xander inserted himself into every part of the process, calling Charell repeatedly, asking for photos of the dresses, offering unsolicited opinions on which fabrics suited her best, and insisting she stay modest, nothing revealing or flamboyant. Even her hairstyle and makeup had to earn his approval. When Sonia, perceptive in her own right, gently suggested to Charell that this seemed controlling, Charell shrugged it off, attributing Xander's behavior to typical male protectiveness. But both women sensed the tension in the air. It was more than standard teenage drama. That tension intensified. During school events leading up to prom, Xander would stand by Charell's side, practically shadowing her every move. He rarely let her hold conversations alone with classmates, frequently interrupting or adding his own commentary in a way that made her peers uncomfortable. Occasionally, Xander would spot Marna approaching and quickly steer Charell away in another direction. He was ensuring that Cheryl's world revolved solely around him. For many students and staff who saw them together, the relationship began to look distinctly unhealthy. Then came the point where Xander demanded that Charell limit her phone calls to Marna, accusing Marna of meddling in their relationship. Charell, exhausted by the constant fights and fearful of Xander's reactions, started acquiescing, letting entire days pass without speaking to Marna, ignoring her friend's texts until late at night or not at all. By late 2017, even Cheryl's father Ronnie and stepmother Anna noticed something was wrong. Charell, usually chatty about her day and enthusiastic about farm visits, grew withdrawn. She snapped at small remarks and locked herself in her room for long periods. When asked what was upsetting her, she mumbled about stress from school projects and college application concerns. Ronnie, a stoic man used to focusing on the farm's daily demands, dismissed it as the teenage phase, but Anna's intuition said otherwise. She mentioned that Xander seemed off to her, though she couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. In January 2018, after a series of heated arguments over the winter break, Charell took a decisive step. She ended things with Xander. She had hoped for a calm conversation in which they might find a mature agreement to part ways. But any hopes of civility were crushed when Xander's reaction erupted into desperation and rage. He bombarded her with tearful pleas, accusing her of throwing away everything they had. Then came threats of self-harm. He wrote to her, "If you leave me, I'll have no reason to go on. I'll end it all." Terrified at the possibility, Charell felt her resolve wavering. Meanwhile, a new wave of phone calls targeted Marna, with Xander blaming her for encouraging the breakup, calling her names, and peppering her with menacing remarks. Marna's father, Stefan, outraged by the harassment, called Xander directly and threatened to involve the police unless he backed off. It was a jarring wake-up call that only partially worked. Xander ceased direct contact with Marna for a short time, but continued to inundate Charell with messages, oscillating between pitiful pleas and chilling hostility. Still, Charell clung to her decision. The mental and physical strain of the relationship was overwhelming. She confided in a few close friends about the intense arguments, revealing glimpses of controlling behavior that stunned them. Some encouraged her to seek an official restraining order, but Charell hesitated, fearing it would enrage Xander more. She kept hoping that his fixation would fade over time, allowing her to quietly move on. Gradually, she began spending more time with someone else. His name was Brandon Victor, a high school senior known for his genuine kindness, soft-spoken manner, and prowess in track and field. Brandon and Charell had met years ago, when they were 14, but they never had a close bond until this phase of her life. Over time, they realized they clicked well, sharing an appreciation for gentle conversation and mutual respect. Brandon, informed of the situation with Xander, respected Charell's wish for secrecy. He did not want to provoke a potentially dangerous confrontation. They would meet quietly in corners of the schoolyard or talk in hushed tones inside study rooms. She found solace in his calm support and started to envision a future in which she felt safe, valued, and unafraid. But if Charell thought that Xander's harassment would vanish simply because she had mustered the courage to move on, she was mistaken. Xander's unresolved obsession only fueled his anger further. In the final weeks leading up to May 2018, he began appearing outside her dorm at odd hours, lingering in parking lots when he knew she'd be around, and maintaining a constant presence on social media, liking old posts of hers, then leaving cryptic comments that suggested he was watching her every move. Some nights, she received texts from unknown numbers with short messages such as, "You can't hide," or, "I see you." Although she suspected it was Xander, she lacked concrete proof. Feeling the walls closing in, she told only Brandon, who advocated for contacting campus security. Yet, out of a lingering fear for what Xander might do if confronted again, Charell resisted official action. All the while, Marna remained in the background, worried about her friend but also grappling with her own concerns. Xander had targeted Marna with blame and hostility, accusing her of meddling. Late-night messages from Xander's phone occasionally reappeared, calling her names or telling her to stay out of their business. Nonetheless, Marna tried her best to keep the friendship with Charell alive. They spent sporadic nights talking about future dreams, Marna's plan for veterinary school and Charell's photography ambitions, like children whispering under the covers, ignoring a monster in the closet. They confided in each other about their fears for the future. Ironically, the main fear overshadowing everything wasn't academics or ordinary teenage heartbreak, but Xander. In the early hours of May 26, 2018, an otherwise unremarkable date that would become a permanent scar on the hearts of those who knew the two girls, events converged in ways that no one could have precisely foreseen. At around 6 a.m., Christelle started her morning routine, walking through the dormitory halls to wake the students. That was when she happened upon a few strands of hair by the bathroom, initially thinking little of it. Proceeding to the staircase, she noticed an odd length of green nylon rope tied to the railing. Her mind didn't immediately process the significance until she glimpsed a pair of feet wearing white socks dangling in midair. Fear gripped her. As she drew closer, she realized it was Charell Hogg, still in pajamas. The rope was looped tightly around her neck, and her body hung limp. Christelle's screams pierced the morning silence. While Christelle grappled with that horrific discovery, a series of frantic phone calls unraveled in parallel. Charell's mother, Sonia, found a text from her daughter sent around 4:17 a.m. saying, "Mom, I just wanted to say I love you and I'm sorry." The text was riddled with an unusual misspelling that seemed off for a girl typically meticulous with grammar. Alarmed, Sonia phoned Ronnie, who had also just noticed two late-night messages from Charell, one with a photo of her in minimal clothing addressed to, "I love you, Brandon," and another stating, "Dad, I'm sorry. Marna and I are leaving." A jolt of dread coursed through Ronnie as he read the cryptic lines. He immediately contacted Principal Richard Hobson, pleading with him to check on the girls. Yet, by the time Hobson and other staff members could respond, Christelle was already in a state of panic over finding Charell's body. Then a second call erupted from the first-floor bathroom. Marna's body had been discovered with a backpack strap constricting her neck, her face swollen and discolored. News spread like wildfire through the school, and stunned students gathered in small groups, whispering rumors about what could have led to such a nightmare. Some speculated that the two friends might have formed a suicide pact, especially given their closeness. Others recounted how controlling Xander had been, suspecting something more sinister. That suspicion gained momentum as soon as the police arrived. Crime scene investigators quickly noted that certain details, the nature of the ligature marks, the angle of the rope, the position of the bodies, didn't align perfectly with a double suicide. The local authorities began suspecting foul play. Ronnie arrived on site, desperate to see his daughter, pushing past any caution for preserving evidence. In his heart-wrenching grief, he tried to unhook her from the railing himself, ignoring the pleas of officers worried about destroying forensic proof. Only with the help of Ronnie's brother, Louis, did they gently lower Charell's body. Meanwhile, Stefan, Marna's father, arrived and was quickly consumed by fury. He declared on the spot that this was murder, pointing directly to Xander as the culprit. Even though the police tried to maintain neutrality, Stefan demanded immediate action, referencing the prior threats Xander had made. Principal Hobson, grasping the severity of the situation, called in Chris Sanders, a private investigator well known in the region for his discreet yet thorough approach to complicated cases. Sanders arrived later that same morning, stepping into a whirlwind of grief, accusations, and tense energy. His first step was to interview those closest to the two girls, especially Brandon, who revealed that on the night of May 25th, he had quietly snuck into the girls' dorm to be with Charell and Marna, knowing Charell felt uneasy about fresh threats from Xander. Around 1 a.m., Xander had called, switching from sweet talk to outright menace in a matter of minutes, culminating in a disturbing ultimatum. "You'll regret what I'm going to do tonight." Fearing the repercussions if they were discovered violating dorm policy, Brandon left around 2 a.m. That was the last time he saw the girls alive. These revelations placed Xander at the center of the investigation. As the police collected fingerprints from the rope and the backpack strap, and reviewed text messages retrieved from phones, Xander's name appeared over and over again, along with references to his obsessive behavior post-breakup. By the time the sun was high in the sky, official suspicion had settled on him. Meanwhile, Stefan, ignoring the pleas of law enforcement and driven by parental rage, drove to Monty's farm to confront Xander directly. Upon arrival, he encountered Xander standing near a shed, calmly speaking with Monty. Stefan charged forward, pointing at Xander and shouting accusations about murdering his daughter and staging the scene. The tension threatened to combust into violence. Then Chris Sanders arrived, having tracked Stefan there, stepping in as a mediator. With the cool-headedness that had earned him professional respect, Sanders persuaded Stefan to back down and convinced Xander to accompany him to the police station for questioning, promising to protect Xander's legal rights, but also making it clear that the evidence was stacking up. On the drive, Sanders skillfully navigated Xander's psyche, referencing the repeated mentions of his name by classmates, the threats he had leveled against Marna, and the last phone call in which he vowed to make Charell regret rejecting him. Within a short span, Xander's bravado cracked. His composure faltered, and he allegedly began sobbing, spilling out a confession. He admitted that he couldn't stand the idea of Charell being with someone else, especially Brandon, and that he had planned to confront her and scare her that night. When she refused to comply with him, he snapped, strangling her in a fit of jealous rage. Marna stumbled into the scene, and fearing she'd go straight to authorities, he turned on her as well. The subsequent arrangement of the rope and strap was Xander's attempt to create the illusion of two suicides, hoping investigators would overlook the glaring inconsistencies. Sanders recorded Xander's confession on a small voice recorder, ensuring that every word became official evidence. When local police and forensics teams reviewed the scene with Xander's confession in mind, the details matched in disturbing accuracy. They found footprints near the staircase that matched Xander's shoes, scuff marks in the dorm hallway, and signs of forced entry near a window. At the house Xander shared with his father, they seized his phone, which contained saved photos of Charell, journal-like notes about her, and repeated references to how he felt betrayed by her decision to leave him. The entire situation painted a picture of an unstable mind obsessed with control. The legal process moved swiftly, culminating in a trial in March 2019 that garnered widespread attention, at least within the province. Family members from both sides crowded the courtroom, and the local press documented every hearing. The prosecution presented Xander's own recorded confession, the testimonies of Brandon and Marna's father Stefan, and the forensic analysis that debunked any claim of a voluntary double suicide. Another key witness, Anastasia Fesser, who knew Xander from fishing competitions, testified about how he had called her the day before the murder, seething about Charell and saying something chilling along the lines of, "If she thinks she can live her life without me, I won't let that happen." At the time, Anastasia had brushed it off as an empty threat. Looking back, she wished she had alerted the authorities, or at least warned Charell's family. The defense argued that Xander's confession was coerced, that the private investigator had pressured him into admitting guilt, and that Xander's mental state was too fragile for the confession to hold weight. They also pointed to the absence of direct eyewitnesses for the actual acts of strangulation. However, the combination of Xander's recorded confession, physical evidence linking him to the scene, and the repeated patterns of his threatening behavior rendered the defense's arguments weak. Psychological evaluations indicated that Xander suffered from significant emotional disturbance, marked by obsession and a deep-seated inability to handle rejection, a dangerous cocktail that, in this case, had resulted in lethal violence. A few experts posited that the intense coddling from his mother, combined with his father's tough discipline, might have bred a sense of entitlement and inadequate emotional regulation. While these insights might have explained his state of mind, they did not absolve him of criminal liability. Ultimately, the court sentenced him to 2 life terms, effectively ending his prospects of freedom. For the families of Charell and Marna, the verdict offered some sense of closure, but little true solace. Marna's father, Stefan, had arrived at the trial every day, wearing a shirt embroidered with her initials, trying to remain calm as he listened to the descriptions of her final moments. Charell's parents, Ronnie and Sonia, who had already endured divorce and the complexities of co-parenting, found themselves united in grief. They decided to bury Charell and Marna side by side, acknowledging the strong bond the two girls had shared since childhood. In a poignant final gesture, Charell's father placed a small camera, symbolic of her photography dreams, by her gravesite. People who attended the funeral recall a hush among the mourners, a sense that this tragedy had stolen 2 bright lights from a community unaccustomed to such horrific violence. Looking back, many in the Stella and Delville areas came to question whether more could have been done to avert the tragedy. Certain classmates whispered to each other about Xander's temper, yet few took tangible steps to intervene or alert the school administration beyond murmuring behind closed doors. Marna had tried in her own way to stand up for her friend, but at 17 years old, she lacked the experience or authority to truly shield Charell from harm. The entire chain of events highlighted a disturbing dynamic that unfolds far too often. Controlling behavior in teenage relationships is frequently dismissed as jealousy, puppy love, or passionate devotion, rather than the glaring warning sign it really is. Today, the story of the Stella boarding school tragedy underscores the importance of recognizing patterns of abuse, subtle or blatant, and underscores the need for communities to take them seriously. This is especially true in environments where close-knit families often keep personal matters private, wary of gossip or reputational damage. The hush-hush stance that once might have seemed protective ended up creating an environment where Charell felt uncertain about seeking help, where Marna's alarm about Xander's aggression never translated into systematic protection, and where a young man's uncontrollable rage took two innocent lives. Perhaps the greatest tragedy, beyond the murders themselves, is the lingering sense among neighbors, classmates, and faculty that a more proactive response, reporting suspicious behaviors, encouraging legal restraining orders, or pressing the school to provide counseling, might have saved both girls. The case also shines a harsh spotlight on the societal norms that can enable toxic masculinity, entitlement, and the notion that romantic possession justifies intrusion and violence. The Northwest Province, like many rural communities, respects tradition and cherishes the values of familial closeness and loyalty. Yet it's precisely in such tightly woven cultures that victims often feel hesitant to speak up, fearing that doing so will rock the boat or cast shame upon their families. Charell herself was described as sweet, gentle, and sensitive, someone who disliked conflict. Her inability or unwillingness to stand firm against Xander's demands was, in part, a reflection of how young women are often socialized to avoid making a scene. Marna, equally gentle but more outspoken, saw the danger for what it was. But her warnings weren't enough in the face of Xander's tenacity and cunning. Today, if you visit the boarding school, you might find a subtle memorial to the two girls, a small engraved plaque near the dormitory stairwell, commemorating Charell and Marna's memory. Students pass by daily, some pausing to reflect on the fragility of life and the horrifying reality that such tragedy could strike two students who, by all outward measures, seem to have promising futures. Faculty have taken steps to introduce more robust mental health initiatives and anti-harassment policies. The local police department, too, has noted the case as a cautionary example, urging families to treat threatening behavior seriously. The impetus is on the entire community to stand watch for the small red flags that might herald more substantial danger. The tragedy has led many to reflect on the confluence of factors that can lead to such violence: mental health issues, family dynamics, societal pressures, and a lack of timely intervention. Some argue that if Xander had received counseling at an earlier age, if the school had mandated therapy after repeated complaints about his aggression, or if Marcia and Monty had recognized that their son needed consistent behavioral guidance instead of polarization, perhaps this all could have been prevented. Others wonder whether the local culture's reluctance to discuss personal problems with outsiders allowed Xander's obsession to simmer too long without correction. In any event, the sorrowful outcome stands as a stark demonstration of how unaddressed controlling tendencies can escalate from manipulative phone calls to lethal violence. At the conclusion of the trial, as reporters snapped photographs and recorded final statements, the attorneys for the defense announced that Monty intended to file an appeal. Monty had initially cooperated with law enforcement when he realized his son was implicated, but later reversed his stance, insisting that the courts had unjustly pinned the blame on Xander without fully considering mental health variables. Nevertheless, the evidence was overwhelming, and Xander's own confession overshadowed any claims of judicial bias. Legal experts in the community maintained that the double life sentence was appropriate for a crime of this brutality and premeditation. Monty's attempts to mount an appeal eventually faded into obscurity, overshadowed by the irreversible damage that had been done. Charell's mother, Sonia, and father, Ronnie, found themselves navigating the complexities of grief in different ways. Sonia described nights where she couldn't sleep, replaying Charell's last messages in her mind, fixated on the misspelled apology and the desperate tone that suggested fear. Ronnie, on the other hand, channeled his sorrow into working the farm more exhaustively than before. He found some comfort in physical labor and the comforting repetition of daily farm life, fixing fences, caring for livestock, plowing fields, anything to keep his mind from revisiting the devastating morning he arrived at the school and saw his daughter's body. For them, the only measure of solace was that they had at least answered some questions and seen justice done, even if true peace remained elusive. Marna's family faced similar struggles. Stefan, once known as a cheerful father who called Marna Tinker, for her introspective and gentle nature, fell into bouts of depression. He sometimes stood at the threshold of her old bedroom, imagining her laughing with Charell, planning future adventures, or practicing her knack for biology and equine care. Her mother, Rionette, still played music in local events, but the melodies took on a mournful undertone. Rionette expressed regrets about not recognizing the severity of the threat Xander posed. After all, she had heard rumors, but assumed no one so young could truly be lethal. Outside these mourning families, the broader community carried lessons from the tragedy. Schools in the region have started implementing workshops for recognizing signs of domestic abuse and controlling relationships. Outreach programs encourage students to come forward if a friend exhibits warnings of intimidation or harassment. Certain local churches have hosted community gatherings emphasizing mental health awareness and the importance of speaking up. Over time, these initiatives have led to better vigilance, but the memory of Charell and Marna remains as a grim testament to the consequences of inaction and underestimation. For those intrigued by the complexities of this story, one glaring question often emerges: what about Xander's emotional underpinnings? Some psychological professionals who followed the case from a distance have hypothesized that Xander was a textbook example of an individual with malignant narcissism, borderline traits, or an extreme sense of ownership over a partner. Another angle suggests that he might have felt overshadowed growing up, oscillating between a father who enforced rules and a mother who never set boundaries, creating internal contradictions that fueled rage whenever he felt challenged or abandoned. Regardless, the case stands as a reminder that controlling, obsessive behaviors can cross the line into violence, particularly when they're continuously reinforced by personal insecurities, cultural norms about male dominance, and a lack of institutional intervention. In the years since the murders, local media outlets occasionally revisit the Stella boarding school tragedy, especially around the anniversary date. They often interview teachers, community leaders, and students about how safety measures have evolved. Some of Charell's former classmates speak up to advocate for clearer protocols, such as staff members who might act upon anonymous tips when a student is in emotional distress. On certain commemorative dates, images of Charell's photography are shared on social media, accompanied by tributes to her artistic eye and empathetic nature. People also pay homage to Marna's love for animals by contributing to local farm rescues or adoption drives, forging small gestures to honor the memory of 2 young lives cut short. From a broader viewpoint, the case beckons a conversation about how we, as individuals and as communities, respond to subtle calls for help. Perhaps if teachers had cross-checked the concerns of different students, if classmates had felt confident enough to report Xander's menacing presence, or if Charell herself had felt assured that seeking protective measures wouldn't lead to further harm, the outcome might have changed. The notion that, "It's not my place to interfere," or "they'll figure it out themselves," has proven disastrously misguided. Another lesson is that teenage relationships, though sometimes fleeting, can also be devastatingly intense. The heartbreak, jealousy, and all-consuming passion of adolescence can become truly dangerous when one partner exhibits controlling or violent tendencies, especially in a setting lacking robust adult supervision or preventive frameworks. In truth, every detail of the tragedy, the small rope, the bathroom scene, the frantic text messages, the hush of the dormitory at dawn, paints an image of two young girls who, in the midst of normal teenage joys and dilemmas, were overwhelmed by an evil they never fully knew how to handle. Their final acts remain shrouded in heartbreak. Did they sense the danger that night, or did they assume Xander's threats were just more empty words until it was too late? Did they have time to call for help, or did the end come swiftly and unexpectedly? These questions linger in the minds of those who love them. For anyone reading this account, one of the most urgent takeaways is awareness. If you recognize controlling behavior in any relationship, be it teenage or adult, take it seriously. Pay attention to the friend who suddenly withdraws from everyone else, the partner who demands constant updates or access to personal information, the bruises explained away as accidental. These are not trivial matters, but potential red flags that can escalate. Supporting the victim and encouraging them to seek help can indeed save a life. Intervening might feel difficult, especially in communities where privacy is deeply valued, but it is far better to risk overstepping boundaries than to stand by and watch as someone sinks deeper into a dangerous dynamic. Despite the sentencing and the passing of time, the sorrow lingers. Yet, there is an element of resilience that marks the people of the Northwest Province, a quiet determination to move forward, to learn, and to honor the memories of those lost. Stella Boarding School continues to educate young adults, but the air is indelibly tinted by the memory of Charell and Marna. New students often hear whispered stories of the two friends who once walked those halls, never imagining how their stories would end. Some might find it scary or unsettling, while others treat it as a poignant lesson about vigilance and compassion. Meanwhile, farmers in Delville carry on with their daily routines, feeding livestock, repairing fences, planting seeds in fertile soil, acutely aware that beneath the seeming simplicity of rural life, powerful undercurrents of human emotion can erupt with devastating consequences. Ultimately, the Stella Boarding School tragedy is more than just an isolated case of teenage violence. It's a window into the complexities of domestic abuse, the vulnerability of young women navigating love and loyalty, and the reverberations that a single act of brutality can have on an entire community. It's about the heartbreak of parents who send their children to school believing in a better tomorrow, only to receive an unimaginable phone call at dawn. It's about the instructors and students who carry with them an everlasting memory of the day horror overshadowed the promise of youth. And, crucially, it's about the reminder that protecting one another is a communal duty, one we cannot shrug off. Thank you for reading through this deeply detailed and expanded account. If you find value in true crime investigations that delve beyond mere facts and statistics, laying bare the human emotions and societal structures that shape these tragedies, please like, comment, and share your thoughts. Most importantly, consider subscribing to the channel Truth One Shadows. It is our aim to bring to light more stories like this, not to sensationalize pain, but to glean crucial lessons about empathy, vigilance, and moral responsibility. By joining Truth One Shadows, you become part of a community dedicated to unearthing hidden truths, advocating for those who can no longer speak, and encouraging transparent dialogue around issues of abuse and manipulation. We believe that shining a light into the shadows is the first step toward preventing future heartbreak, and we appreciate any support that helps us continue this mission. Let us hold Charell and Marna in our memories, carry forward their stories, as stark lessons, and remain vigilant so that such tragedies never take root again.